Hello there, my friend. Thanks for taking a moment to check out this video. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing David New, who is the founder and CEO of an awesome little company called Tiny Pulse. And what he's doing out there with Tiny Pulse is it's a really powerful tool that organizations can use to get a really quick measure of what the climate is like in their organization. It's 360-degree anonymous feedback that takes employees, 2 to 3 minutes once a week. Everything's automated, where the administrator for the company really doesn't have to do anything except set it up. All they have to do is just analyze data, and they can get an immediate pulse of what's going on in their organization, how people feel about the organization, and then, of course, take steps to improve where need be. Now, Tiny Pulse is a relatively new company, but they're already working with clients like HubSpot, Microsoft, and National Australia Bank. So they're really growing quickly. The feedback from customers is amazing. And today I wanted to talk with David about, he had an amazing journey to get where he is, learned from numerous leaders, and I think he's got some great ideas that can help leaders in any organization to improve the engagement of their teams, regardless if it's a two-person team or a team of 50,000 employees, to improve engagement and effectiveness. So if you would, before we bring David on, if you could help me welcome David New, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me, David.
My pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited about the work that you all are doing, and I'm really excited about this interview. So before we get into talking about, what I'd like to hear is like your 3 big ideas that any leader can take away to improve engagement on their teams and improve team effectiveness. But before we get into that, I would also love to just let the audience get to know you a little bit better. And one of the questions I ask of just about everybody I speak with is, the first one is just, why do you do the work that you do? What gets you up in the morning to make an impact in the world?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And our mission at Tiny Pulse is to make employees happier. Yeah, at the end of the day, we're going to spend over 50% of our waking hours at work. Why shouldn't we be happier? And I always tell people, when you walk through that door, you have a choice in the morning. You can be happy, you can be neutral, or you can be negative. But the kicker is, it's all free. So you have a choice when you walk in. So why not at least be neutral, if not happy? So we get really excited to facilitate that, where people can be heard, can be acknowledged, and have an open forum to hopefully be happy at work, because we're going to spend so much time here.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So if we're going to spend the probably majority of our waking hours someplace, it's probably not a bad idea to enjoy it.
That's right.
So something along the same lines, in terms of, or very similar to why you do what you do, is I also like to ask, what are maybe the top 3 core values that guide your work and guide your decisions every day?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think first is, it comes down to passion. This is my 3rd startup company, and as I've made my mistakes along the way, I think I've gotten a little bit wiser, although I'm still learning. And one of the things, when I consult with other entrepreneurs who come to me for advice, they're like, hey, I'm thinking I've got this great idea on this ad serving platform, or this, that, and the other. So I always ask them, hey, if you won the lottery today, would you still work on that same project tomorrow? No, I wouldn't do that. I go play golf. I said, well, why don't you go work on a golf-related startup or something else that makes you passionate, because you're going to spend so much of your time at work. So, that's one of the things that guides me, is really being passionate. I love what I do. I love getting feedback from our clients, not only the employers but employees, about how we're making a difference in their work environment. So that impact and that passion really gets me going in the morning. The other one is really focusing on happiness for employees, is because, at the end of the day, I just think about my own father. He was a petroleum engineer for 30 or 40 years. He went to work every day, kept his head down, punched the clock. Probably wasn't super happy, but he was able to put food on the table and provide a stable living for me and my sisters. And now I think about it, if he had this outlet to share his feedback in a safe way, to maybe engage and be a part of that change, to make it a better culture and an environment at work, that could probably have made a difference in his life. And then the third one that we think a lot about at work, guiding principles for me and the organization, is also around transparency. one of the things that we realize is that transparency has such an impact on culture. When people realize that management on down is very transparent. So we share internally how many customers we have, our revenue. We're transparent that we have a saying internally called big freedom equals big accountability. So we don't track PTO or vacation or sick days, but we're very transparent about that. If you abuse it, then there's no place for you here because of the big accountability part. But then once you're accountable, then you have big freedom. So that transparency is also something that we share with our customers. So when they ask us, hey, is there some arduous contract that I need to sign? We're like, no. Our value, our promise to you is if we delight you, you pay us. If we don't deserve to get paid. It's that simple. So I think that's also an underlying foundation for us is to really focus on transparency. So it comes down to being passionate about what we do, making an impact by making people happier at work, and then being built on a layer of transparency.
Very wise, and I feel like I was very very lucky to have had a nice phone conversation with you a short time ago. I think it was about a month ago, wasn't it, David?
That's right.
Yeah, and you just you shared the story of how you got to where you are, and I think it's absolutely amazing. And I think there's some great takeaways from it that people could apply. So would you be so kind as to maybe share in a like a 5-minute version of how you got to where you are?
Yeah, definitely. So, I've been a serial entrepreneur and angel investor for over a decade now, and at my previous startup, we had raised over $10 million from Tier 1 VC, so optically, everything was great from the outset. But, I knew that when I was going to work every day, I was getting burnt out. I didn't feel like I was a 9 or 10 going to work, and I didn't feel like that was fair to the board, the investors, my partner, and most importantly, the people I'm privileged to manage on a day-to-day basis. At the same time, I had some life-changing events. I got married, and then I had a baby daughter in really quick succession, and then I just felt like, I've been really a hard-charging entrepreneur, and I needed to do something different. So I shared with my co-founders and other people that I needed to take a break, and I called it a career vacation, or a careercation in short. So I ended up selling everything I owned, stuffing the rest of my belongings in storage, and buying one-way tickets to New Zealand for me, my wife, and at that time, my daughter was 10 months. So most people said, you're crazy, but then there's other people who said, hey, I wish I could do that. So our goal was that I was going to travel and buy one-way tickets around the world, and I wanted to do 2 things. One, I wanted to create these amazing shared family memories with my young family and really be present and be there. And then 2 is I wanted to interview entrepreneurs and CEOs wherever I went to learn about best practices when it came to culture, managing people, and leadership. Because for some reason, I felt like one of the reasons I probably got burnt out at my previous business was probably related to that, although I couldn't put my finger on it. So I thought it would be this journey for me to interview these people and share that wisdom. So, and then I also challenged myself as like, David, in Seattle, a bunch of tech entrepreneurs. So why don't you push yourself, make yourself uncomfortable, and interview entrepreneurs in different walks of life. So, for example, I interviewed over 35 and like the winemaker in New Zealand, the fruit trader in Shanghai, the financial services and consultant. I would ask them, these questions, tell me about best practices and lessons learned when it comes to leadership, culture, and managing people. And at the end of every interview, I'd ask one question. I would say, hey, Matt, what's one pain point you have when it comes to managing people that if I took away, you gladly pay for? So, different people would tell me different things. I make these kind of mental sticky notes about their responses. And only until I got sufficiently far away from Seattle, both time and distance, could I be really, really still and do something revolutionary called listen. So no cell phone, no text messages, no emails, and really think about, are there any trends of these sticky notes that I've been collecting? And there was. And that despite distance, location, despite industry, despite the size of their company, that one of the most common pain points and haunting feelings for these entrepreneurs and CEOs is when a key employee says, Matt, here's my 2 weeks notice out of the blue. So it's like, wow, how come I didn't see that coming? Where are you going? Can I save you? Is there something I did, something I didn't do? And then the other shoe drops where it's like, oh, crap. How I'm going to backfill that person, and then is this a cancer, or are other people going to be running towards the doors, or is this going to be isolated? So that became my inspiration for Tiny Pulse, is that there are this new class of leaders who really, really do care. So I wanted to give them a tool to give them a pulse on how happy, frustrated, and burnt out their team is before and retention sinks or issues fester and become cancerous. Because I used to work at a management consulting company. At the end of the year, the tool that I was used to, when I get this big pulse, 50 questions, and I'd hit submit in December, poof, I would not know what happened. And then during the summer picnic, they would say, okay, we collected all this feedback. Here's 3 things that I want to address. I'm like, 3? Where so many people get so much feedback. Well, why is it 3? I didn't feel heard or validated. So now, that was what I used at my first company. That's all I knew about. But now I believe that we can flip that model on its head. Instead of having a big pulse, we can do lightweight pulses throughout the year. And then, because people's feelings change all the time, so that the leader is able to understand the temperature on an ongoing basis, and then be able to make changes to be much more responsive and acknowledge issues that are going on. So we're very, very humbled that it's taken off, and a lot of other organizations have joined on board, to further the mission of making employees happier.
So on your just it almost sounds like a movie. I could just picture you like on some sailboat pulling into a town and going to talk to the one of the more well-known entrepreneurs in that town or something. On this journey of yours, I would imagine you learned a lot. And in addition to learning that there is a major pain point of losing somebody out of the blue because you just don't have a pulse on where people are at, you don't have a pulse on the culture. I would imagine you learned some other things. What would you say, in addition to the importance of getting a pulse every week on your culture and knowing where people are at emotionally? What would you say are let's go through maybe the top 3 things that you learned one at a time. What would be the first one that comes to mind?
Yeah, great question. So, one of them, the first one is kind of thinking about when people come on board, the beginning process. And this is what I learned from an entrepreneur, CEO in Seoul, Korea. And he says that, look, if we want people to align with our culture, then we should be very, very intentional about how we attract these people and candidates in the first place. So he takes his cultural values and vision and mission, and he front loads that right into the job rec. And then he asks candidates, well, can you share experiences in the past where you've exemplified these values? And if they're not able to answer that, or they're not willing to answer that, then they're not going to be a great fit. So he saves a lot of time because he believes, it's going to be a combination of skill, but also a lot about fit too. So that's something that I've learned that I've built into our own process, which is on the front end is, how can we screen for the people who are going to be the right culture fit and who align with our values and also the right skills fit. So that's one of the lessons I learned on the front end of the process about attracting great people.
Well, I like the way he's articulated that question as well. Where it was, don't just tell me your core values. Tell me a time when you live these core values. Because, I would imagine, like for instance, if I wanted to come work for Tiny Pulse, I bet I could find your core values someplace.
Yeah.
And if I was a deceitful person, I could just kind of make up a good story about how those are my values. But I think it's a lot harder when you've got somebody on the spot and you're saying, all right, tell me about a time when you live these values. I think that's great.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the second biggest takeaway that you got from all of these amazing entrepreneurs around the world?
So then, if we put the lessons I learned from this guy in Seoul, and then I think about, well, once they come on board, what are some lessons learned? So I was interviewing a CEO in Australia. She owned an agency. And when I went into her office, I felt like I was in Zappos. Like everyone was happy, they have these big sombreros, lots of positive energy. And so we did this tour, and then we sat down one-on-one, and she said, David, believe it or not, about 18 months ago, our culture was crap. I was like, what? You got to be kidding me. This is an amazing culture. How was it like that? And, she told me that, it was so bad that she had to get everyone in a room. The company was going through some turmoil. She said, hey, we all know that our culture stinks here. But, I'm committed to making a change, and you guys have to decide if you're coming along the journey. But make no doubt about it, we're going to go on this journey. So they came up with vision, mission, and values together. But then one of the things that she did that really stuck out at me and what we do is she said, we role play our values. I'm like, well, what does that mean? So, for example, one of her core values is to have great fun at work. So they had a vendor so they're an agency, so they make a lot of like print materials for marketing clients. And the client was, or the vendor was a low-cost provider. But no one liked working with them because they were a pain in the butt. So, so she said, well, based upon our values, what should we do about this? And their employee said, we should switch vendors. We should go with someone who's more fun, or at least more easy to work with, and we should eat the higher cost. And she says, you know what, you're right. Based on our values, that's what we should do, even if that costs us more. And that really struck a chord with me. And now she says she does it all the time. So she's like, well, this culture, as our company grows, is going to be beyond me. But as long as we're always consistent, regardless if I'm in the room or not, they're all going to be on the same path because our values will guide us consistently. So that's something that we do as well. Is like when we onboard people or we talk about decisions, we're like, well, what do our values tell us we should do? And let's be consistent about it so that we always are on the same page. So that idea of role-playing values and really bring it to life versus kind of like PR material in the break room about, hey, here are our values, but actually like living it and making decisions based upon that was really impactful and a great lesson for me.
So to me, the key takeaway I heard from what you were saying is that these values are more than just a poster in the CEO's office or something.
Yeah.
They're actually everybody in the organization knows them, and that they're actually using them to make decisions. So I would imagine, do you find that your experience has been just from these different leaders that you talk to, that when a leader is doing that, when people are really clear on what the values are and they're using those to make decisions, do you find that people are more empowered, where they feel like they have more freedom to make decisions on their own because they're really clear on the values?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it definitely empowers people because they know what the boundaries are, because they role play and they come with consistent answers, like hopefully all the time or a high majority of the time. So if I'm not in the room or someone's not in the room, they know like, okay, well, we are on transparency. So if a client asks us this question, we should be very transparent. So I definitely feel like it empowers people because they know what the rules of engagement are. And they're measured on it, and they role play it, and they're very, very intentional about that.
Excellent. So the first two big ideas are, making sure that when you're onboarding people, or even when you're interviewing before somebody's onboarded, I should say, you don't bring somebody into the organization unless you have a really good sense that they're aligned with your values. And then the second big idea is, when you've got people that are aligned with your values, make sure that they understand them well enough that they can use them to guide decision making, so they're empowered. What would you say is the third big idea that you got from this around the world tour with your wife and lovely little girl?
Yeah, so this idea, although sounds simple, is something that I think a lot of leaders overlook, and it's a low-hanging fruit in my mind. And so I learned this from the CEO of a consulting company, and he says that he has these Monday meetups. I'm like, okay, well, what's a Monday meetup? So he has his EA, I think his schedule a different person every Monday for dinner and drinks. And then it just rotates different people. It's already set on his calendar. Everyone knows that it happens. And then to be able to meet with the CEO for dinner and drinks is a privilege that a lot of the people look forward to. And during this dinner and drink, what they do is they don't really talk about anything related to work. He's trying to build relationships and rapport with this individual. And at the end of every dinner, he just asks one question. He's just like, hey, what's one thing we're not doing here that we should try doing to be more successful? And he says like the volume of feedback that he gets and ideas is phenomenal because there's no layer between the people and the CEO. They've already broke down a lot of those barriers because they've been having a good time just chatting, and he's shown that he's genuinely interested in knowing their feedback. So for example, one of the outcomes of that is that they said that they wanted more team building events because there's only one kind of the executives had this team building event. So then he created, based on feedback from multiple people, where everyone could go to that event, and then the executive would still have the breakout. So based upon that, I've incorporated that into my business, and it's actually been awesome to be able to rotate and meet people and not talk about work sometimes, even though, of course, that creeps in. And then at the end, just to ask them, a very, very similar question. It's like, hey, what's the one thing we'd be crazy not to try at work that, maybe we're not thinking about doing right now. So I've really appreciated that it was such a lightweight thing to do. But I think it definitely means a lot and opens a lot of layers of communication between managers and the people who are on the front lines.
Now, I'd imagine this would be very easy to do even for an entry level manager who might only have 5 or 6 people on her team. She could invite people to lunch or something like that, or if there isn't much of a budget. Have you found anybody that's having to do this really on a shoestring, and maybe they don't have the budget in their company to pay for a whole dinner and drinks, but they're finding creative ways to do this on the cheap, so to speak?
Yeah, and I think I've heard other people who do this. They just go for a walk. So they just say, hey, come walk. I think Steve Jobs was really famous for doing that, but that was more impromptu versus a scheduled one. So let's just go for a walk. If it's nice outside, let's walk around the building, the park, or wherever the facilities is, get a little exercise, stimulation, and get out of the kind of work environment. So that's one opportunity. Or the other one is people can go for coffee, which is very cheap, or brown bag lunches, which are also a good options. So I don't, I think any one of those would work in that case. I've just decided to copy what he does, but I think there's definitely lots of alternatives, and it goes up and down the chain. Like you said, it could be entry level, or it can be someone who's at a higher level, but being able to build those bridges and get that information flow, so that that person knows that, hey, my manager cares. So even if I miss the opportunity to have a great idea, if I have a great idea in the shower tomorrow, I feel comfortable talking to him or her about that idea, and at least we have that great flow of information going back and forth.
Yeah, because the rapport is already built and the trust is already there, right?
Mm-hmm. And then you're investing in it on a constant basis because you've already scheduled it in the calendar for these people too, so they know it's not a one and done or a hit and run initiative.
Right. Something that's going to happen. Depending on how many people are on your team, it's going to happen every couple weeks or every couple months, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Fantastic. Well, David, this has been fantastic. I think there's some really powerful takeaways that people can go and apply. Again, regardless whether they're leading a team of 2 or a team of 2,000. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. Before I let you go, if there was one message you would leave with people, to say, this is David New, this is what I stand for, and this is what I would ask you to do to be more effective in both your personal and professional life. What would that be? What would be your suggestion to people?
Yeah, well, when I was doing a lot of the research and getting the kind of courage to take this careercation, I read this great article, and I think it came from Huffington Post, and it was a lady who was a palliative care nurse. So she was caring for people who were about to pass on. And she would just talk to them in bed and say, well, what are some of your biggest regrets in life? And then she took all these responses and she summed them up and then had rank order. And the number one biggest regret in life that people had on their deathbed was, I wish I had the courage to live my own life versus a life based on other people's expectations. So I think my big takeaway was yes, society encourages me to be a successful entrepreneur. I have to always be hard charging, do this, do that, these expectations. I'm like, it's okay for me to do something different and take this careercation. I think I came up stronger, more well-rounded, and I benefited, and my family also benefited from that. And now I feel like that is the path I want to walk, regardless of what other people think about it. And I would encourage a lot of people to be very, very intentional about what they want to do next, because we only there's one truism. The game always is over. Whichever game you're playing, it's always going to be over. And what type of at-bats do we want to have? Are we going to go up there and look for singles, or we're trying to swing for home runs? But let's just be really intentional, because we're only going to get so many of those, and live the life that we're going to be really happy about. When we're in that same situation in our deathbed, down the road.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So again, this is David New, this founder and CEO of TinyPulse, and I thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, David, and thank you for those of you who listened in. I look forward to serving you the next time around. Bye for now.